I think I asked you earlier if you'd seen the movie Margin Call,
Yeah.
and I just recently, I saw that one late too. I think it was 2010 or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great, when you're talking about groups of people and some of the rules of sort of the, let me try that again. We talked about the movie Margin Call, just watched it. I think you said you did too.
Yeah.
I'm wondering who is the hero in that film? Is it Stanley Tucci's character?
Well, see, that's what I think is so interesting about it. Margin Call is a great exploration of moral ambiguity. So it's a perfect example of breaking this concept of the hero's journey. It's about a phenomena that happened. It's about people who were willing to make certain moral concessions in order to achieve certain advantages. And in that way, we began to explore this whole new world. Like through Margin Call, we began to explore this whole world of finance and collusion, corruption, without necessarily condemning or dismissing it as just this. I mean, yes, it's a disturbing thing that happened, but it explored it in such a way that was trying to say, like, we're trying to look at the psychological mechanisms that were active to create this situation. Because we're still trying to wrap our head around that recession. We're still trying to wrap our head around like all the consequences and how we got there. And the whole point of story is really to help us to build meaning so that we can avoid falling in those pits. And Margin Call is a perfect example of exploring that without trying to impose virtues, but instead engage a deeper understanding of what were the causes. And that to me is really interesting storytelling. I mean, I still enjoy hero's journey stories. Like, Star Wars is like the original 3 were some of my favorite movies when I was a kid. But Margin Call was designed to be critical and arrive at a certain understanding. It wasn't trying to say, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. And that's why I think it was a much more sophisticated, interesting story.
Yeah, that was a brilliant film, and it was done, I think, with very few crew members. And
yeah.
I think I was hearing that maybe there were so few crew members that people were, when they saw some of the talent in the film, like it was such an open set that it was hard to keep onlookers away because there was not a lot of security. It was just
really?
Such a small production.
Yeah, it's super contained.
But so you would say though that maybe Stanley Tucci's character in Margin Call wasn't the hero, but he was the protagonist, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely somebody that represented a certain moral that we aspire to. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, there is the kind of implication of like, if we had just had his, but I mean, he was somebody that wasn't able to prevent it either, Right. So it's like, he's somebody that's behaving nobly and with integrity, and several characters were, but ultimately it wasn't just this simple, this is how to behave to solve this problem. Mm-hmm. It's an exploration of like, what are the psychological dynamics, which is, to me, that's so much more interesting.
Let's take Spotlight for a moment.
Yeah.
You saw Spotlight?
Yeah.
Okay. So is there a hero in that? Is Mark Ruffalo's character the hero, sort of exposing some of this stuff?
That's it, you're bringing up several. That's another one that I wouldn't say is propaganda, because it's not, it wasn't about trying to impose a value system. It's about exploring the causes. Okay. And I think a lot of the great stuff is trying to explore the causes of how we get in this situation. And Spotlight, ultimately, that's what was so great about, what's his name? Birdman.
Oh, right. With Michael Keaton.
Yeah, that's what's so great about Michael Keaton's character.
Right.
Was they had that moment where he was, where he realized that he was the one that closed down the story. Like, he realized that he was contributing to some of the cover-up. Mm-hmm. Not because he was deliberately corrupted or colluding, but that's what the story is about the fact that we're not looking in the right direction when it comes to certain things that are harming us. Mm-hmm. And it asks the question, why are we looking past all these things? Why aren't we seeing these predatory behaviors for what they are? Mm-hmm. And that's why I think it's a great movie, because it's about how slowly culture dilates the spotlight to focus on the things that we need to. And then the balance becomes, how do we focus on it without a witch hunt? And that's another interesting theme.
Right, and then you talked about tribes and community, and so tribe is something that has a common enemy.
Yeah.
Right, and then community, I mean, anybody who's had a corporate job where, you have to sort of, there's politics, there's unspoken politics, and then there's spoken, and that's the thing about margin call was presented in a way where a lot of times we have to look the other way for things, and we don't want to, but we know if we want to keep a job, kind of have to sell out, and that was so brilliantly portrayed in that film.
Yeah. Have you ever read Seth Godin's book, Tribe?
I have not. I think I've watched some videos where he's talked about it.
Oh, okay.
But I know he has an amazing library of books that he's written.
So it's interesting because what he defines as tribe, I would define more as a community. Largely because what he's saying is we need tribal leaders. We want you to find people that, we need people that are passionate, that are interested, that are engaged, to take up their mantle and explore things that they're interested in. And that's good, that's all healthy. To me, it becomes tribalism when you introduce an enemy, because what he's describing is voluntary interactions of passionate people. And that's a good, healthy thing. That's a robust community. But with a tribe, it turns into this is our enemy.
Right.
This is how and that's when a lot of the thinking becomes disproportionate. That's when we begin to interpret everything as a threat. And it's great at creating loyalties. And if you look at the political landscape we're looking at, it was all about people doing everything they could to portray the person they disagreed with as an enemy.
Yeah.
And therefore, we have tribal loyalties. It's a great way to short circuit people submitting to or complying with things that they would never comply with otherwise. So I think ultimately tribalism has its place. Like you look at the military, it's a deeply tribal culture, and it should be, because it needs to be able to respond to threats. That's the purpose of it. But generally speaking, as like a nation, as a country, tribalism is rarely the right answer. Just because most of the time we don't have these threats, we don't have these enemies. We mostly have causes that we want to resolve, issues that we want to resolve and collaborate. And ideally, mostly, we have common interests that we voluntarily interact with. So, and that's something I'm going to be talking about in my interview in the next tribalism video. So I don't want to give too much of a cheat.
Yeah, okay.
Giving you all my good content here.
And also too, the as you said, without getting too deep into specifics of the political landscape, that it's made some people who weren't tribal members parts of new tribes.
Yeah.
And people that have been friends for years basically turn on each other.
Yeah, it's radicalized everybody.
Right.
Well, not everybody. I mean, I think most people are like, this is just silly. It's just getting ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, you have these people behaving radically, which creates a lot of strong emotional reactions, and that strong emotional reaction just breeds condemnation, and condemnation breeds fear, and which ultimately breeds loyalty and separation. So, a big theme that it goes through almost all of my stories is this idea of how do groups work and how do they develop value systems versus the individual, how the individual develops value systems. And so a lot of my stories are all about a person slowly coming to realize, and this is true for my own personal life story, somebody who's very much wrapped up in the narratives of a group, becoming aware of how those value systems have failed them, and then begin to engage the work of deconstructing that in their own life and then overcoming it. That's something that's probably a big theme in almost all of the stories that I write. But I also think that resonates with a lot of other people too.
Who was the author that said men go mad in crowds? Forgive me, I should know this.
I don't know, that's a great quote though.
It's a famous...
I think I said it, I'll claim it.
Okay, that sounds good, yeah. It's either that or Oscar Wilde.
Have I ever told you men go mad in crowds?